Good morning, and many thanks to LafargeHolcim for their support of these conversations. It really is a privilege to be here with so many thoughtful people whose work I'm keen to hear more about. In my work, I'm asking that we look at the urban world with half-closed eyes and see not only buildings with shapes and outlines, but the almost infrastructural matrix in which buildings are suspended. This infrastructure space is not just an infrastructure of pipes and wires and hidden under the ground, but something like a spatial operating system for shaping the city. And that operating system is like a rule set that's 3D printing repeatable formulas and spatial products, the cartoon of skyscrapers and malls and resorts and franchises and parking lots and airports and golf courses and greenhouses and ports and free zones that, again, far from hidden, press into view and often look the same, whether they're in Texas or Taiwan or here Inner Mongolia. Bankers and developers and World Bank yes men and 28-year-old McKinsey consultants are coding infrastructure space, and it's often largely regarded to be only a byproduct of laws, econometrics, informatics, logistics, or global standards. And when wrapped in TED Talk locutions, maybe these technical standards, technical languages, or the latest digital technologies also have the most authority in contemporary problem solving. But while it may be difficult to see at a moment of digital ubiquity, the lumpy, heavy solids of urban space themselves constitute a technology and an information system, in the same way that Gregory Bateson said, a man, a tree, and an axe is an information system. And it's the spatial technologies of infrastructure space that are overriding the planet. That spatial language or code is creating de facto forms of polity, and it's even a secret weapon of stealthy political forces. So however unlikely it may seem, and beyond the authority of those other technical languages, I'm arguing that space is currently the underexploited medium of innovation that brings to designers another relevance with different aesthetic pleasures and political capacities, an expanded repertoire of form making, but also a surprising, unorthodox approach to political activism. Infrastructure space prompts a different habit of mind about design, but it also turns out to be an adventure in thinking with broader cultural significance that offers nothing less than some new instruments of global governance. This different habit of mind about design and politics might begin with one simple observation. Culture is well rehearsed at pointing to things, calling their names, recognizing their shape, but under-rehearsed at describing the interactivity or chemistry between things. So infrastructure space is productively imponderable because it's not a thing. It's a large socio-technical system, and with a nod to Rosalind Williams, it's too large to be in any one place. It cannot be assessed by its name, shape, or outline, but rather by its disposition, the latent properties that unfold over time and territory, its propensities within a context, or the potentials in its arrangement. That disposition, that agency and arrangement, like an operating system or growth medium, decides what will live or die, what will constitute information. And I've been arguing that while designers are good at making buildings and landscapes, we might also be really good at detecting and adjusting disposition, the capacities, even the political temperaments latent in organization. So again, sort of looking with half-closed eyes, this faculty, which may be under-rehearsed or under-indulged, allows us to see the world with a split screen, to see not only objects and declarations, but also the matrix, the activity, the disposition that's been hiding in the air in front of our eyes. Everyone in this room works really hard at making responsible, reasonable decisions, having the right answer to design issues, building consensus, following best practices. But having the right answer isn't enough in a world with global warming naysayers and Donald Trumps. And reasonable innovations can easily be outmaneuvered by unreasonable politics. But an ability to adjust disposition in infrastructure space offers another approach to design that's not always about just holding to standards and having the right answer. An approach that allows design to exploit the powers of these large systems by reaching into time and into giant macro-organizational strata with moves that are potentially sneakier and more politically agile. The stories of infrastructure space are usually stories where reasonable things don't happen and where innovation comes up against these political superbugs and bulletproof forms of power. I'm often asked to tell the story of one of these supernodes of infrastructure space that inevitably appears in lots of your work, the free zone, the crossroads of many networks under consideration over the next few days. This is one free zone promotional video, but they're all the same. There's a zoom from outer space that drops down through clouds to reveal a new center of the earth, and a deep movie trailer voice repeats all the neoliberal mantras of free trade and incentivized urbanism to which foreign investment has become addicted. Free from the laws of the host country, the zone offers no taxes, no bureaucracy, streamlined customs, and deregulation of labor and environmental law. The stirring music of an epic adventure or western accompanies a swoop through shimmering cartoon skylines and resorts and suburbs and sun flares. You know the story. While in the mid-20th century, the free zone was a warehousing or manufacturing compound for storing custom free trade, it mutated to the EPZ, export processing zone, a UN-promoted formula for jump-starting the economies of developing countries. And in the last 30 years, it's become the germ of a building epidemic, making all the glittering mimics of Dubai and Singapore and Hong Kong all around the world. The zone that used to be this, or this, Maquiadora outside Tijuana, or this is now this, or this, or this. It still harbors labor and environmental abuse and still fails to deliver on its economic promises. But egged on by global institutions and consultancies, the zone is often bathed in redemptive rhetoric and treated as the necessary signal for entry into the global marketplace, so that the next poorest country wants its mirror-tiled skyline at any cost. And the promotional videos get more and more delirious as the zone becomes more and more contagious. I have to play you some of this porn.
Of immeasurable value. Nothing is as rare and desirable as diamonds. Diamond Palace attracts magically, fascinates inside and out with its scintillating architecture. The inner design of the palace transforms the image and emotion of the diamond onto the visitor, letting them become a part of the myth of the diamond.
Anyway, you get the idea. in this split screen, you can see the objects and the declarations, the skyscrapers, and the fictions about openness and relaxation and luxury and freedom. But you also see the autonomous island, free from any law or urban circumstance that obstructs corporate profits, a major organ by which corporations avoid regulations. You see not only the skyline, but if you're good at detecting disposition, an organization as closed loop that erases inconvenient information. Or traveling through infrastructure space, look at a place like Kenya. In the wake of fiber optic submarine cables is exploding with new broadband capacities and skyrocketing numbers of cell phones. These digital information technologies are most productive when they work together with other information systems of different lineaments, countering some myths of the smart city. Again, whether or not it's coded with digital sensors, space itself is an information system. It's already a network and a router. Space computes. And spatial information systems are more robust when people access each other and multiply their exchanges. And when the intelligence of cities and when the intelligence of cities and landscapes are more robust, digital information systems are also more robust. But rather than innovative spatial arrangements, in Kenya, the spatial vessels that often accompany digital technologies often erase information. They might be large highways that decrease exchanges by inflating distances between people, or the zone enclave with the disposition of the closed loop. And as the spatial information system gets dumber, it makes the digital information system dumber as well. Or look at Bangladesh, a country with an extremely shallow coastal plain where the rising tide due to global warming can as you know, race deep into the interior. The people who are displaced relocate in cities and work in factories like those of the Dhaka Export Processing Zone, the site of the Rana Plaza collapse, a tragic example of the deadly dispositions imminent in infrastructure space. We try to regulate labor and environmental abuse in these factories with the standard making that occupies another strata of the infrastructure space operating system. ISO is one global parliament of this soft law that determines technical details like the thinness of credit cards or the pitch of screw threads, but they also determine the often hilarious patois of the ISO 9000 quality management with its acronyms and bullet-pointed lists and mandalas and motivational aphorisms. Sometimes management standards like ISO, from ISO or other NGOs, raise awareness or change behavior, and sometimes, funded by the very companies that contract for the factory services, they only provide non-binding, self-certifying seals of approval that inoculate against further regulation. LEEDs is part of this global habit of standard making. So in the split screen, you can see the discrepancy between what the organization is saying and what it's doing. Whatever its labels and certificates, the organizational disposition is sometimes, again, a closed loop that's tightening to eliminate inconvenient information about human rights and environment. The house always wins. So infrastructure space constitutes a kind of extrastatecraft, a realm of governance outside of and in addition to and often in league with the state, where some receive excessive immunities and others are consistent losers. It's a place of profound failures. Rana Plaza, the Shenzhen collapse, the ongoing climate change denial, the financial meltdown of 2008, or even now the contemporary refugee crisis. It's often not fueled by cast iron economic logics, but by very powerful habits and fictions. And within this matrix, conventional organs of design and governance, buildings, master plans, standards, laws, have so much authority, even when they're spectacularly inadequate and unimaginative. So again, might the spectacular failures and powers of infrastructure space inspire nothing less than a different organ of design, different ways to register the design imagination, form making in another gear. We're all very good at making buildings, but working in infrastructure space is less like making a thing and more like having your hands on the faders and toggles of organization. Studying it trains you to see the field, like seeing the board in chess, anticipating several moves ahead. Adjusting the disposition in infrastructure space benefits from an artistic curiosity about reagents, spatial mixtures, spatial wiring, about designing not a single object form, but active form that inflects a population of objects or sets up relative potentials between them. The active forms that manipulate disposition in infrastructure space are time-released forms or dynamic markers. They're like little bits of code in the spatial operating system, multipliers, switches, other network adjustments. Active form. One of the LafargeHolcim winners from a couple of years ago, Amy Milkey and Caitlin Taylor, designed pore form, a concrete detail that could absorb urban floodwater. And the detail assumed many incarnations in many scales, from a curb cut to a gigantic gathering space the size of the Tate Modern's Turbine Hall. They were designing an active form, designing not only the detail, but the way in which it will become a multiplier and eventually a network in the city. Or the designer of active form thinks about adjusting a larger network by changing one switch within it. Can you, as I've been long been advocating and others in the room, to change a highway system by making smarter intermodal switches within it? And maybe it's even worth noting now that without these switches for upshifting and downshifting into different transportation capacities, even the smartest things like the new driverless vehicle might be as dumb as the mid-20th century car. But how might you hack into the world's dominant softwares by combining forms like multipliers and switches into organs of interplay? How do you shape global agreements, not as buildings, master plans, declarations, laws, standards, but as something more like bargains or chain reactions or ratchets, protocols to recondition space over time? I often refer to a simple spatial software of interplay like the 18th century city of Savannah, Georgia. Oglethorpe, its designer, didn't design a master plan or object form, but rather a growth protocol. The town would grow by wards, each of which contained a quotient of public, private, and green space and agricultural space beyond. You didn't know the shape of the town's outline, but you had an explicit, measured spatial instruction for relationships between things. It was like a governor or a thermostat, an interplay between counterbalancing spatial variables, a time-released instruction for the ongoing activities of urban space. And might these kinds of protocols of interplay between spatial variables become a more prominent paradigm for governance? A few years ago, at another LafargeHolcim conference, I presented a spatial protocol for the subtraction of building through interplay. So if you allow yourself to think about active form as well as object form, you can consider not only putting the development machine into forward, but also putting it into reverse. So the protocol was something like Savannah in reverse. And in cities like Detroit, after the 2008 financial crisis, the failure was so spectacular that an almost magical thing happened. Many properties stopped being financial abstractions or trafficked mortgage products and returned to being heavy buildings on land, collected and traded by land banks. Using this more physical portfolio, the protocol suggested several ways of simply linking, counterbalancing toxic and densifying properties. The revenues from one property might relieve another, and if cities, as a result, acquire and aggregate land for infrastructure or other projects, the properties might generate dividends for each other. A subtraction protocol might be useful in many parts of the world, from distended McMansion suburbs to coastal floodplains to sensitive environmental landscapes like the Amazon rainforest. Different from the designer's desire for a tabula rasa, it might even be a safeguard against more violent ecologies of disenfranchisement. Through interdependence and exchange, no property is ever worth nothing. In those flooding coastal areas, in addition to all the other things we design, we might design a macro-organizational move that changes the terms of the problem in infrastructure space. What if mortgages were simply considered in pairs and groups? And with the benefit of intelligence from urbanists and landscape architects and regional environmentalists, an index could target and rate properties for complementary or counterbalancing attributes that reduce collective risk. In other words, like a matchmaking website, the exchange would rate not single properties, but the effect of pairing properties. A shoreline owner moves to higher ground. A year-round coastal property becomes a seasonal vacation home. A municipality is able to aggregate land for levees or water retention or sand replenishment. So for transactions that result in more resilience or a net move to high ground, banks and insurance offer lower rates and streamlined deals. So the mortgage that's been a multiplier of virtual financial disaster and social disaster and environmental disaster is finally rated not for virtual financial abstractions, but for environmental properties that offer more tangible risks and rewards. What if, in addition to our buildings, master plans, low aerial views, et cetera, we left behind another kind of code or shorthand like this, designing simple linkages or counterbalancing interdependencies that could be established like software and updated? A city like Nairobi might make a better bargain with their assets like millions of cell phone users. Some countries have made access to their oil and gas resources, for instance, contingent on investment in other industries that they need, and an offset that leverages sustaining resources. So maybe one way even to hack the zone is to use foreign investment to leverage benefits for existing cities rather than newly minted ex-urban zone enclaves. Just like the interplay between public and private in Savannah, the interplay can link investment to shared resources, like transit here in red, that benefit the city while delivering workers to business. This urban rewiring settles the intelligence of people in the city, increases security, saves the cost of ill-advised development, more directly returns benefits to the domestic economy, and perhaps most importantly, returns the enterprise and its workers to the protections and regulations of law. With an alternative organ of design like this, how do you diagram not solutions, but things that shouldn't always work? Not because they're marginal or weak, just because they need to be agile enough and with sufficient temporal dimension to be able to respond to the moment when they're outmaneuvered. In sensitive landscapes like the jungles of Kenya or here in the biodiverse rainforests of Ecuador, in addition to a subtraction protocol, might there be an interplay between any number of things? Let's take digital and spatial information systems. Again, spatial information systems are more robust when people access each other, and landscapes more intelligent when they preserve their atmospheric powers, their biodiversity, and their indigenous culture. And while roads are typically regarded as conduits of progress and opportunity, in rural and wilderness areas here in pursuit of oil, they can erase the information immanent in cities, villages, and landscapes. It might be more productive to dial down roads, the gray lines, when dialing up broadband, the red radiating circle, to preserve farms and forests as the green information system that attracts more global resources for tourism and education. So here, one's hacking a telecommunications network by changing a road as well as changing a bit of code. In a final urgent example, infrastructure space has streamlined the movements. The infrastructure space that I look at has streamlined the movements of tens of millions of tourists and cheap laborers and products around the world. And the sharing economy has linked millions in one-on-one and 190 countries in the world. Yet at a time when 60 million people in the world are displaced, more than any other time in history, the problem of moving 5 to 6 million people away from a global atrocity is simply one we can't solve. The nation state has a dumb on-off button to grant or deny citizenship and asylum, and the aid organizations often seem equally innovation-free. So to address these and other problems, is it possible to slither between the state and the NGOcracy as another kind of design entrepreneur, not policy expert, but social political design entrepreneur, offering spatial urban variables that change the terms of the problem? Can the resources and logistics of infrastructure space be hijacked for other purposes? These alternative organs of design might come with different documents, but they also inspire another kind of knowledge or practice. With a tip of the hat to Gilbert Ryle, designing interplay is less about knowing that and more about knowing how. It's not about always knowing the right answer, because one can only know how to navigate a river or feel for the potentials of bread in dough or land a plane in high wind, or hustle, or kiss, or tell a joke. So there's things you can only know how to do, and there's an artistic comfort with unfinished processes that are, it sounds ironic, but that are indeterminate to be more practical, or unfolding in time to be more politically vigilant, remaining in place to respond to a counter move. And since there's no time to describe some of the details of the protocols of interplay I've been talking about, it's more important than what to do or rehearsals about how to do it, how to encounter a problem. And the discrepancy of that split screen offers additional political capacities. Relying on fluid, undeclared intentions, most of the global powers in infrastructure space are masters of the split screen, decoupling their official declarations from their disposition, saying something different from what they're doing, and they can confound dissent. Our clanking left-right politics or neoliberal labels are completely inadequate to handle some of these moving targets. Dissent that is itself a closed loop of right answers and ultimate righteous solutions is especially vulnerable. There's certain moments when dissent must stand up and declare opposition, yet as important as knowing that, knowing what to oppose, is knowing how to oppose it. And two can play at this game. More than just a tool of political bullies who play dirty, the split screen inspires a sly approach to spatial activism. The dispositions that can hide in the air in front of our eyes can be tilted toward alternative politics and surrounded by the same camouflaging bluffs. With a nod to Latour, it's a world where Gabriel Tarde is as important as Marx. Being able to separate what an organization is saying from what it's doing is the first step in learning to manipulate both sides of that screen with sneakier techniques like gifts and pandas and rumors and meaningless distractions and other totemic fictions that are so effective in culture. Anyone who knows how to get things done relies not only on proper declarations, laws, and standards. The designer can hardly hope to be successful without knowing how to design the spatial change as well as the spin that propels it, the irrational desires that accompany any innovation. And they can't be any stranger than buildings that are shaped like diamonds or dolphins. So again, infrastructure is too big, and it is in no one, infrastructure space is too big, and it's in no one place, and many problems are only exacerbated by duels or righteous binary conflicts. So the sneakier David never bothers to kill Goliath if he can use Goliath's large size and many multipliers to amplify a change. The activist who's too smart to be right can steal some of the powers of infrastructure space and design a snaking chain of moves to worm into and generate leverage against intractable politics. Thank you.